Warning: the contents of this podcast series often include sensitive subject matter and themes that might not be suitable for all viewers. Potentially triggering issues are discussed, and viewer discretion is advised.
If you or someone you care about are dealing with issues that impact their mental, emotional health, sexual health, or physical safety, please check out the resources linked in the bio or reach out to us directly. We are here to assist you toward emergency care and experts. Prioritize your well-being and sense of safety. Welcome back, dear ones, to Shattered Foundations, Reconstructed Self. Here, beloved members of the deconstruction community share their stories with the world. As we deconstruct from religions in our own ways, our podcasts celebrate how we reconstruct ourselves, who we are, what we believe, and how we move forward in rebuilding our personal and collective foundations. I am your sultry co-host, Garnet, joined by the dedicated, innovative, and passionate Anchor Tahir. I'm grateful for the opportunity to co-host with you today. How are you?
Good, thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
For our 666th episode, I asked Tahir if we could do something a little different. We want our listeners to have ample time to dissect the recorded experiences thus far. As we are passionate about assisting our community in understanding complex traumas, I wanted to reorient our listeners back to our own bodies and experiences. I want us all to ensure we are taking the time to process our individual shared experiences. Throughout the creation of this podcast series, I myself have been surprised at the way random memories of my past experiences with religion suddenly resurface. They suddenly pop back up. Things I hadn't thought about or unpacked yet, and even things I had completely forgotten. As we gather our time and attention together, I want us all to celebrate how much we all help us unpack our past experiences. We're all in it together. We're helping one another unpack, even if we don't always know it. And just as importantly, I want us all to remember to keep checking in with our own selves, our own bodies. As memories surface, joyous, painful, and otherwise, there also can concurrently arise physical discomfort or dis-ease. After conversation with our delightful Anchor Tahir, we decided to switch our style, integrate, discuss resources, and some housekeeping items. But first, before we get into some of the nitty-gritty, Tahir and I wanted to take some time to review what's been shared thus far and send some encouragement to our previous guests.
So as we kind of go back through the episodes, really consider what it was that was discussed, I think one of the things that I really took away from your episode specifically was the conversation about focusing on what your nervous system is telling you, how that's connecting then to, where you're at, because the way that you're feeling mentally, psychologically, emotionally does manifest in physical ways. And so you can, think that you're addressing something just by going through the thought process of it all, breaking things down. But there's also that physical component that needs to be addressed too. When you're in a heightened emotional response, it's not so easy to logically talk yourself out of this emotional response that you're having, but it's when you slow down and breathe and start to deal with some of those physical manifestations of this stress, this anxiety, is when you start to get enough clarity to tackle the mental component. So, just that reminder that they both work hand in hand, and both both should be addressed. And I think that is definitely a great reminder.
Cool. Well, good. I'm glad that was useful for you. I've listened to your episode a few times, and that church is just wild.
Yeah.
Here's the thing with your episode is there's this inside outside component for me. The inside, the stuff you talk about, your experiences. I find the whole Easter thing really relatable, not for me, but for what I've observed on people living on other reservations, for example. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that connects it, for me. Then also the dynamics of that place itself. And I'm just thinking oh my gosh, I don't even know what I would do. And we talk about Christianity being a cult, but some are more occult than others. There's a
Absolutely.
lot of flavors of this. And there are ways that some places are really kind of in your face, obvious, to a lot more people. And then there are some that are just very, very subtle. So I found that whole you unfolding that experience, you kind of interrogating those experiences for yourself. I feel like that was really cool to witness in you. And then like the outside component is that, later on you talked about how you had that aunt come out of that same church. So it was just like, oh my gosh, this is more than just, yes, telling the story for a podcast and making content, talking about things that happened, right? But there are concurrent experiences happening where it's already impacted somebody else. Your deconstruction story was already transforming someone else's life and family forever. So it's like, that's like the inside outside thing, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's kind of cool to think about, because when I talk about the podcast with other people in my circuits, I always share like the outside thing, because for me, that's such solid proof that where you are right now, who you are as a person, the way you've been reconstructing yourself, up to now is like working, and it's helping people close to you, right? So I love thinking about that and talking about that with others. And also, side note, there's this really wild thing happening out in Las Vegas. You are not going to believe it. So so that was really cool to witness.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. And you were talking about how listening to these stories starts to bring up memories, and it was after my episode is when things started coming back to mind. I'm like, oh yeah, I should have mentioned this.
Click.
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of fascinating how, it's my experience. I lived it. And so it felt like, oh yeah, I got it all out. And then it was still after the fact. I was like, wow, there's even still more left to unpack. So, that's one of the things that I found interesting.
Well, that's also why I will get into this more with the housekeeping thing, but that is also why I want those resources in the descriptions. And I tried to find things that touched on a theme that was like most relevant for you. What came forward in my mind is like, ooh, I really want to know this or learn about this or be helped by this. But it's a continual experience, that kind of unfolding. There are things that we don't consciously remember, but our body remembers. Our body remembers what it felt like to be in that space, to be in that condition. And so in the realm of the mind and the conceptual, logical thinking, brain, mind space, right? The mindscape is kind of one area of the psyche, like the psychological trauma. That's one realm of us that needs to be addressed and healed, have its time to recalibrate. But then the physical body itself, and that's a completely different element of us, a completely different, element to us that also needs its own time to recalibrate and reset. Often on a chemical level. So I think about these kinds of things as we put these episodes out there. And I want all of our previous guests to also know that I did tailor make some resources, and I'm pretty sure I might need to follow up with a few of them. I'm sorry if I missed you guys, but I try to send those resources to our previous guests. We can move on to, I want to talk about, we got Joyful's episode. That was episode
2.
Episode 2. Okay. I think about Joyful's episode from time to time. And so one of the things that really sticks with me is the way that he had more atheist, kind of free-spirited, quote unquote hippie grandparents. And then like fundamental Christian parents, like the switch from non-religious into religious. And so I found that to be very fascinating at that point in our nation's history, especially because Christianity really was like the dominating, most pervasive religion, like across Turtle Island. I found that to be really interesting. But I walked away from Joyful's podcast with, I don't know how to explain this, but he's just like so cool. I don't know. I was like, man, this guy is like, he's just cool. I don't know why I really like this guy. And now when I'm in his live streams, it's like I see him differently, but like more, I see him like more. And I think about his wife and like his family now, and the way that some of my first interactions with Joyful obviously was before the podcast. And one of them was when he was calling some BS out on TikTok and was like, we're not having this, and we're absolutely going to blow your shit up. And I was like, yes, like this guy is just cool. Like this is the kind of person that I want to be around. Just am sending you all my encouragement, Joyful. You know, so much gratitude for your being on our podcast. And I really, truly am rooting for you and Holly and whatever else needs to happen for your family. Just all of the success and abundant joy. And I love that name, Joyful. I love that name for you. I know you have like a real name, like a government issued name, but in my mind, you're Joyful. And I love that. I love that.
Yeah, forever will be joyful. I mean, it's so fitting. But interestingly, my pull away from Joyful's episode was because I had already had this feeling like, oh, this guy is cool. But I got more of that's a badass, you know, like that guy's got a tough exterior. Look at him go.
Yeah, man.
And it was through the episode that you were able to kind of see once that wall comes down a little bit, he's just like everybody else. He's got his own things that he's dealing with, his own history. And, you know, like you said, you see him a little bit more now. That is kind of how I feel too. He's not just somebody on TikTok that's, you know, speaking truth to somebody or calling somebody out for some bullshit. But he's somebody who is tender as well, is complex as well, the way most people are. And I did appreciate, you know, getting to see kind of almost, and I mean this no shade whatsoever, but almost kind of like that Wizard of Oz moment where his persona online is more of that, the big scary wizard, but then behind the scenes, you know, that's just an act. He's just a normal guy. Again, I mean that in the best way possible, just to kind of illustrate what I mean. But yeah, Joyful is super cool. He's, you know, a really, really great person. And that definitely came through for sure on his episode. And I also wish him, Holly, and the family the best. And especially for Joyful, I just really hope for healing, for patience and kindness with himself, and, you know, all the happiness in the world, because he deserves it.
Oh, I was thinking patience with the guests on TikTok. The guests during the stream.
Right.
That's why I laughed.
No, maybe that too, a little bit, but, you know, not too much. That's why we like Joyful, is he doesn't play around.
Sometimes you gotta be spicy, man. Like, get him out of here, this
100%.
guy.
Yeah, sometimes it's absolutely warranted. So
that's also another reason why I really like this podcast, because we do get to see the different aspects of the person. We kind of see the content and the content creation. I love seeing those sides to people where they get to nerd out or whatever it is that they're passionate about. But then also there's a reprieve from that, and we're able to sit with other elements of them, you know, other elements of them that they're reconstructing, like a stained glass window. It's all the different pieces, all of them. And we might be looking at one piece online, but now we get all these other pieces and we get to see more of like who you are shine. So I love that.
Yeah, so true.
So next we had Seth. What do you want to say about Seth? I really liked Seth's episode.
Yes, I really like Seth's episode, but I also really like Seth as a person, which, you know, I was already sure that I would, but I realized after the fact that I think the vibe that I kind of get from Seth's online presence is a little bit more like, I'm gonna chill back here. You know what I mean? Like, I don't love attention on me too much. I'm not front and center guy. I'm kind of hang back and observe guy. It was kind of nice to see Seth take an opportunity to put himself on a stage and put himself on display and share his story, open up and be vulnerable as somebody who may not necessarily do that too often. I know he does his fitness updates, which that in itself is definitely putting yourself out there, but you know, we don't really see too much of Seth other than that, other than when he's like, you know, in the same spaces with us. It was just kind of nice to see somebody who doesn't too often take too much attention to put some attention on himself and be okay with that.
Yeah, I like that too. Speaking of workout videos, shout out to Kitty. I also really like the workout videos, mostly because it coincides really nicely with my whole theme of get into the body, the nervous system, and like regulation stuff. So I like that we could talk to a content creator on here that is focused in the body and knows what that feels like, and is making content around that for our community. So that physical health component, it really is such a crucial part of taking care of ourselves. And it doesn't have to look like weights in the gym and a regimen plan. I mean, it doesn't have to look like a whole built out thing. Although if that's, what you need to go for, then yeah, absolutely do it. But meeting yourself where you are, meeting your capacity with what you are, and safely engaging the body to explore your strength, to explore your movement and your muscles and this sort of thing. It more than just quote unquote getting stronger or faster or, more than just that, although that feels great and that's wonderful. It also is a way for the body to kind of work through those energies that might be stuck and it's, it feels like pain. Being able to move the body around, it gets your joints limber, and not taking that for granted. I feel like I really want to stress that for our listeners. So I was so glad that Seth came on and, with a super cool guy and like his cool cat workout videos. But something about Seth's episode also that I really liked to sit with. One, I love that the Unitarian Church made this like random, pop in. And then the Seventh-day Adventist crew, just 44,000 different denominations. So I guess I can't be surprised, right? When they all show up, they all are probably going to show up over the course of our podcast. But like just kind of getting those insider clips, because I didn't grow up in that denomination. I was non-denominational. So we weren't allowed to talk to Seventh-day Adventists. Like I was barely allowed to play on the playground during like school days when no one was at the church, right? Because I could catch like the wrong Jesus. I don't know. I don't know what the fear was. It took a while for me to be able to go to the playground, and I couldn't go there on Sundays. That was the deal. I could go there during the school, only on school days, but not Wednesdays and not Sundays. Yeah, that was just kind of interesting thinking about someone on the inside of that and what that was like, because my experiences were I was never allowed to connect with people from that community. Yeah. Especially as a kid. So then the next thing that I really liked listening to about Seth's episode was the next two things. So one was the friend that supported him. And you and I talked about this briefly before, the podcast tonight, that I really liked hearing that he was consoled, like in a time when he was wanting to be who he was and not wanting to feel like he had to wrestle with any identity with religion or as a Christian or with the Bible and who he knew himself to be. And then going to a friend that supported that and validated that. And it reminded me a bit of Joyful's episode too, because he talked about that with his own daughter as well. But I like thinking about people finding those support networks, finding those little moments to connect with another person that validates who they are and validates their identity. Yeah. 100%. And then the last point with Seth's episode is I really appreciate his discussion on his missionary trip. He went as a fake Christian, as an imposter Christian, to hang out with some folks in another country for a while. And the way he tried to stand up for those kids against the indoctrination, and just the way that he just wanted to be present as a person and not be an emissary or representative of a religion or of a doctrine, and just be present as a person. That stuck with me as well. Yeah. And shout out to Erica. We love Erica. Erica is now in the Discord. Yeah, that's a nice update. That person that was so instrumental in helping him walk away from the religion is now in our deconstruction community. So well, shout out Erica, and thank you so much, Seth. Thank you so much. Yes. It was really cool to sit and talk with you. I feel like, of course, we all love getting to know Benny and listening to him, hop up on different panels and be throughout the Discord. But like you said, Tahir, I really liked, taking someone who was, not necessarily necessarily doing what all the things that Benny does, and putting the spotlight on and be like, okay, let's hear your story. What you got? Let's see what you got. So yeah. And Seth showed up, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, Seth.
Yes. And also, too, I'm going to keep saying it, but we talked about some Seth fitness classes or yoga with Seth in the episode. And I followed up with Benny and I said, I really want to see this from Seth. So, you got to make it happen.
Okay.
And it hasn't happened yet. So this one's at you, Seth. We need that fitness content. Just saying.
So next up, we have Miss Patricia. That was more wild for me because it took everything you had, which I already thought was like, oh, this couldn't get any more wild. And then Patricia was just like, well, actually. And I was just really blown away at everything this person had gone through. I remember walking away from that podcast just so proud of her. Like so proud of her. And when I think about the inner child and, I'll say on the podcast things like, we are now learning how to be the adult that should have been there for us, but wasn't. And I see that that's what she's doing with her family, with her kids, and setting up those boundaries, setting up the priority of taking care of yourself. You need to put your own mask on before you assist another person. And that's real. You can't take care of other people if you aren't taking care of your own self. And I just love that example that she's setting and the way that she's embodying what it means to have healthy boundaries, to fight for yourself, to advocate for yourself, and to accept yourself, to accept the things about you that you want to change, but also to accept things about you without believing the lies that a religion tells you about those things about you, right? So I really appreciated listening to Miss Patricia's story. I really appreciated the way Patricia was really just transparent about what she saw and what she experienced in the Emmanuel Temple Church. And I found it just really insightful because, again, it wasn't my own experience. So I'm learning about all of this stuff for the first time. Obviously, I know that there are things like that generally happening somewhere in the world. Like it doesn't surprise me, right, that this kind of stuff is occurring. We know this. That's just the standard fact of our reality. But to sit with two people who survived that and to like really hear in detail the kinds of things that go on, I'm so grateful that she came forward and shared it because I feel like it can help people like me who don't have direct experiences sort of see those signs and see what that looks like. Get a really in-person close-up, like not just a bird's eye view of knowing cults in general, right? But a really kind of deep dive, like, oh, like, okay, what came forward for me in her episode was I got deeper insights on the way that celebrity culture, celebrity worship, celebrityness, celebritydom can really be so embedded in some of these churches. And I've always known that on some sort of like broader meta level, but listening to the way those dynamics play out and recognize like, oh my gosh, that's what that looks like, celebrity worship. That's what is going on here under the guise of, showing appreciation to the pastor and the first lady. The way that she sort of helps us learn how to see deeper insights to that dynamics and then what the most extreme version of that dynamic can cultivate in a community and the harm that comes from that. Yeah, like, wow. I really sat with that for a long time after her episode.
Yeah, no, I mean, even knowing what I knew about the church, even hearing some of that was still kind of like shocking to even me, so it was definitely a deep dive into like her experience there and her marriage. And I think that was the biggest thing.
Chad.
Right. Boo, Chad, for sure. But I think that was one of the things that really stuck with me, especially because when she first left and came back to Michigan, this was years ago. And then just to see how far things have come for like her family, in that, now she's at a place where a couple of them, are vocalizing that they want to come to Michigan and be with her. A couple of years ago, it just didn't seem like something like that was ever going to happen. But then to hear her talk about it and to feel the emotion still so close, it was a little bit a reminder that time passes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that wounds heal. And, it was a reminder to be a little bit more tender with this person who is still going through this thing that may have been initiated years ago, and that, extended beyond just leaving her kids and the emotions that come with that, but then the whole being coming out of an abusive relationship element too. And so it was just one of those things, like a reminder that you really don't know the types of battles that somebody's facing unless they tell you. And it was just kind of a reminder to lead with tenderness. Maybe sometimes we don't really think about leading with tenderness or empathy, but that is one of the things that I kind of took away from that episode. And one of the things that came back to memory for me after my episode, and maybe after hers as well, but you were talking about the celebrity culture, I remember that feeling of being in the crowd. And when they're up on stage thinking, like, oh, I hope they see me, like, look at me, I'm shouting, I'm doing the right thing, like, notice me. And I'm thinking back now, why did it matter so much to me? It was because I was taught that that's how you be a member, by doing these things, by, praising these people and like borderline worshiping these people. But that's how pervasive that celebrity worship attitude is, that like a brand new member, I knew right away, this is how I'm supposed to be, kind of thing. And then about the celebrity culture as well, one of the things that we've learned since my aunt's episode, my aunt found out that they were having a dinner with the pastor and his wife. They call her the first lady. It might have even been the two of them and their family, just having a normal dinner with them. Nothing like a big event, just literally a dinner with them. And they only had 100 tickets, and these tickets sold out before the church service ended. These tickets sold out, and they were $200 per person. And so if you put that, calculate that out for 100 people, that's $20,000. Yeah, $20,000 that they made off of one meal, and the honor, quote unquote honor, of sitting at the table with them for this meal. And that is literally the only draw to that. And I think that's it's abusive to like ask somebody to pay that much for that kind of honor, but it's also pushing people to spend money on things that it's not necessary, especially we talked about in her episode how they would have banquets, but the church members were paying for them and funding them. And so in my mind, wouldn't this be a nice opportunity to flip things around? Hey, we're hosting a dinner. We only have space big enough for this many people, but we're covering all the costs. Like something along those lines, so that you're not charging people for the, again, quote unquote, honor of having a meal with you. I just couldn't believe that.
Yeah, that also bewilders me. It is a source of frustration and even anger, because you're doing that now. That's what you're worried about. That's what you're doing now. Given our current climate, given our current political climate, given our current cost of food, cost of things. Yeah. So as we talk about on this podcast series, as we are talking about, previous things in the past, and this is what happened, right, past tense, there's also this element of recognizing that these stories very much are still evolving. And the longer we continue our walk away from kind of ground zero of what happened, those spaces are still moving and changing and doing their thing. And those spaces are still unfolding with the kinds of storylines. So I do look forward to learning more about the Emmanuel Temple Church. I do have my own sets of concerns about this, but I'm really glad that both you and Patricia are out. And I'm so proud of the both of you. And I'm so proud of, you for coming forward with this idea of like, let's talk about the deconstruction journey process. And you're like fresh out of this experience, wanting to get involved, wanting to be community minded. Even in the example that you just gave right now, like, why couldn't the church do it this other way? And this other way was so community minded.
Yeah.
So I love that you found the deconstruction community and, you're coming in wanting to bring your passions, wanting to illuminate the passions of other people, but also coming in wanting to build community. And we see that in just how you are, just how you talked just now. So it really is a lot to unpack of what has happened, right, past tense, but also too, the way that these things will still unfold in the future, which is why, again, I come back to the body, to the nervous system, getting those tools for self-regulation, getting those habits and those patterns to make space for you connecting with your own bodies, us connecting with our own bodies. And even just the memories of it are still coming up, still coming to surface for, I know for myself and maybe for others listening. So the focus on the body and getting back into the nervous system, and why I keep beating this drum, is because I really do want to set all of us up with the tools and the practice and the foundation to fortify ourselves, fortify our nervous systems, fortify our body, and re-entrain ourselves. What you said was key. And how did you put it? You said time really doesn't heal the wounds. It's not, the time away or even the space away. That healing process, that's a self-activation thing. And sometimes that self-activation looks like intentional rest, looks like intentionally not doing something and being quiet, being still, or moving, or doing something that brings you joy, right? So I'm not talking necessarily about do, go, but to harness your willpower to form that concrete intention. That is an activity in and of itself. And it's something that I want us to learn how to be vigilant with. So as we maybe will come full circle to some people, places, and things that have changed since we've left, I want us to be able to arrive in that moment with our full self, knowing how to appropriately recognize red flags, danger, do I need to move myself? Do I need to da 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 da? And then having the tools and the resources to act. So yeah, I'm really grateful for this podcast, and I'm really grateful for your and Patricia's stories, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that will come out. Not just, I know that there have been a lot of people who have come out of those situations, but I feel like in the past, a lot of them wrote books because that was kind of the way to talk about experiences. But now with the evolution of technology and microphones, and more of us getting microphones and, sound equipment and all these kinds of things, there's more ways to connect with individual experiences all around the planet. So I'm glad that we're making space for these kind of more extreme-ish, I'll say, cult-like experiences, because listening to these experiences and learning how to recognize, but then also feeling empowered within ourselves to know how to respond and not react, that I really do want to highlight that I want this to be a space where we become activated our own selves. So
no, I mean, that's a great point, because we say every episode, we reiterate the purpose of our podcast. There's two components. There's the let's unpack what you've been through, tell us your story component, and then there's the reconstruction component. But normally we approach that from more of like as a person, how did you recreate yourself, your life? But a component of that reconstruction is the healing component, because it's
Yeah.
how we kind of touched on in today's episode is time doesn't necessarily heal all wounds. And just because you walk away, you deconstruct, that doesn't necessarily even mean you've healed from your experience or you started healing.
Yeah.
So I do like putting some more intention and emphasis on the healing part of Reconstruction.
Again, thank you, Patricia. Next up is Acheron. So Acheron's episode, and I said this in the episode, so you all need to go back and listen to it. But Acheron's episode, I found that one so fascinating, especially coming on the tails of Patricia's episode, which was reminiscent of your episode, right? Of like being and staying in the cult. And then here in the very next episode, we have someone who remembers being a child and telling their parents, I don't like this. This is weird. Don't bring me back here. And they were just like, yeah, that's cool. That's fine.
Yep.
And it's so simple. It's so simple, but therein lies the secret sauce that too much of humanity completely misses. Believe the child. Listen. I couldn't quite explain the way that such like simple small act really spoke volumes to me. And I really liked listening to his experience as someone who deconstructed at the drop of a hat at such a young age and then had to grow up in a society that predominantly comprised of people who subscribe to this religion, who subscribe to these doctrines. And I just am really so curious about what does humanity look like to someone who didn't believe this stuff as a child. And I found a lot of encouragement, again, thinking about the podcast and the way that we put this online and, we're sharing with people. But I really like that it's on YouTube because I do want young people to find this. I do want people to come across this and to be able to click with that experience. And that was also something that I said in that episode was that this might be a really unique or newish experience in our generation, but I feel like this will become increasingly common in the incoming generations. And I feel like we're making content that is not just talking about the past, but is also thinking about and considering the future. I love that. I love that. That's really deep for me. I really appreciate things like that because this is something that we are passing along to the next generation. And I mean, we talk about red flags, right? But recognizing the specifics on how indoctrination works. What is the programming? What does the programming sound like, feel like? What are those experiences? Because allowing that to unfold and give that space, carve that digital space out to build out that kind of library for people, it's only going to equip the future generations with the tools and the microscopes to look very deeply and investigate very critically anything that they might come across. And I hope these next generations become more resilient to those kinds of programmings. And in a sense, I really see that they already kind of are. I feel like kids are unpacking things at much younger ages. And I'm glad that we have that sort of representation of someone that might click with way more younger people in terms of the experience of not being involved in a religion or, yeah, that was my grandparents kind of thing, or maybe my great grandparents kind of thing. But my mom has always just been like, no, we don't have to do that. And it's fine. Right. So that's what I really liked about Acheron's episode.
As I'm thinking about Acheron's episode, what really struck me the most was that because for a lot of us, and we talked about the negative self-talk and the, what do we call them? Was it diatribe is the word we were using? Maybe
I think so.
But yeah, that you kind of go on where it's like, how could I have been so foolish and like really getting after yourself for quote unquote buying it or quote unquote believing it, and then even I think you had mentioned in his episode that your first instinct was a little bit of jealousy, like, man, how nice that is and what it must have been like kind of thing. And so I think that that's probably a reaction reaction for a lot of people who deconstruct, that feeling of, man, if only I had that opportunity, how different would things be? And it's like,
Yeah.
on one hand, you know, a lot of the negative things that happened to you wouldn't have happened. That is absolutely true. But on the other hand, hearing from Asheron's experience, you know, when we were kind of asking, like at several stages of life, do you feel like, you know, your experience was different? Do you feel like you or they had a little bit of an advantage? Like trying to see where the differences were. And I think until past childhood, it seemed like his experience was pretty normal, like quote unquote normal, to somebody who grew up in, and again, everybody's story is a little bit different, but it was just shocking to hear a lot of, no, I don't really think it was that different. Or, yeah, I didn't buy into the religion, but I still had trouble making friends. Just kind of, you know, having this imagination of, oh, his experience must have been so different. And then to hear him say, like, no, I don't really know that it was. You know, obviously
I'm still a teenager and still a young adult. And so,
So, like, obviously less some of the more traumatic, I guess, parts of the way that religion has impacted a lot of our lives. It was, I found really interesting to hear this perspective of, well, I had that quote unquote advantage you may wish that you had, but it didn't really do me too many favors, you know, for the most part. You know, not to put words in his mouth or anything, but anyway, that's kind of what I found interesting.
It does, like what you're talking about here, it does kind of touch on that. It touches on those distinctions between the individuated experience, the individual experience, but still contextualized in a broader collective framework. So while he might have deconstructed and his parents might not have been invested in the religion, the fact of the matter is they still had to learn to navigate a settler colonial society that is invested in that.
Yeah.
And the way that those doctrines sort of program people with the patriarchy and the capitalism and, you know, all the isms and the things that we're naming and trying to deconstruct collectively right now, those still impact us. You know, we're not impervious to those because we are social creatures. So even if, you know, he's not bought into the doctrine, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's iron will impervious to all forms of, you know, because that's just not how human beings are. But also we can't underestimate how much the doctrine and the kinds of systems that these doctrines uphold, it really is diffused throughout the collective. So while, you know, you might not meet people that are necessarily preaching on the street, but they'll definitely be like a misogynistic asshat, right?
Yeah.
And all of those things are byproducts of the way that Christianity and patriarchy have upheld these capitalist systems and these exploitative systems. So that was another highlight for me in that episode, was being able to really reiterate this fact that being quote unquote smart or your IQ or your intelligence level, it really doesn't have anything to do with your ability to sort of get drawn in, sucked in. And again, we're right back to, this is why you stay in touch with your own nervous system. Be aware of your own body's survival instincts and the way your body will adjust itself to avoid danger, to want to survive, to want to live. And when a religion and those doctrines sort of steep into and activate those survival programs, those are really the marionette strings that are warping the logic, performing the mental gymnastics, you know, all of the tumbles and the pretzeling and all of the kinds of things. So I really liked that as well, because it goes back on the sentiment you were expressing about sort of grieving that lost time and not beating yourself up. Like, how could I fall for it? How could I fall for it? Well, because it's beyond your cognitive reasoning process. It really is a hijacking of the nervous system. And when that happens, that can override so much of what we now see clearly with our eyes now. In retrospect, in hindsight, we can see these things clearly. But in that moment, your nervous system is making decisions on your behalf, and you're just rolling with it because that is how we survived. It's an evolutionary byproduct, and it has gotten us to this point. And yes, we are also now empowered to rewire those mechanisms so so that it serves us and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't get us into these sort of shenanigans.
Yeah.
Like sort of out of the pot into the fire kind of thing. So thank you, Asheron. Thank you for joining us.
You were making me remember that was one of the things that he had said, touched on in his episode, is it's by design that it taps into these things, that it hijacks these things. And it's had hundreds of, hundreds of thousands of
hundreds of years, thousands.
To perfect their model, to perfect the way that they enact their different tools. And they've had lots of time to perfect it enough to where it is able to grab people and keep them in and bypass, like you said, logic and cognitive function. And so that's another reason to not be so hard on yourself, is you're against a pretty huge machine there, you only stand so much of a chance. It's like you're lucky if you don't get quote unquote sucked into it, especially not even taking into account whether or not you're born into that environment. So extending that tenderness and that compassion and that empathy that we encourage to have on others, turning that back on yourself is important too.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that reminder. That self-compassion piece, that it really is the key. It really is the key. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was also something that came to mind for me too. And I really liked how you highlight the fact that we're up against some steep stuff that extends far beyond our lifetimes. Like it just extends far beyond our individual lifetimes. So yes, I want to emphasize that importance. Be so gentle with yourself and, have that self-reflection and that self-integrity to recognize, what are your choice points and when are you making decisions to choose things because it's familiar and comfortable. But also when it comes to remembering and working through the guilt and working through the shame, really extend yourself that grace, that this is really deep neurological wiring that we are not taught how to construct and hold in a healthy kind of way. So not only are we dealing with the product of how many hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. So we already have our own human evolutionary process that we're dealing with, but now it's compounded by a set of religious theological programming that knows how to steep in and sort of hijack and puppeteer that nervous system. So I appreciate what you're saying here.
And thank you, Asheron, for bringing that to the table.
Yes. Yeah. I really appreciated your episode. Thank you for speaking with us.
As we close out this section, I want to make sure that I go back and thank all of the people who were kind enough to come on our show, but in doing so, being so honest, in some cases brutally honest, being so open and willing to share, to air out things that you may or may not be proud of or that may be hard to talk about, knowing that it could potentially help somebody. I kept hearing, I just want to be able to help somebody. I just want my story to make a difference to somebody. And that's exactly why we have this podcast, and to have it continually reinforced even by the people that we've had on our show has been really rewarding and really encouraging. So thank you, everybody, honestly.
Now we would like to move on to some housekeeping stuff. This, I wanted to take some time and just talk about the logistics on how to find our podcast, where we are on YouTube, this sort of thing. So, all right. So now that we've taken some time to review and digest and process some of the past experiences that have been shared on the podcast, I want to close out with just some housekeeping items. I want to go over where we are in the YouTube, what does our channel look like, and sort of highlight some of the things that we are talking about in the descriptions of our podcast episodes. So in case you guys don't know, we are obviously on YouTube, which if you're listening to this, then you're already here, but you can find our podcast series, the collection of our series, in the Deconstruction Junction YouTube channel. So you go to Deconstruction Junction page, like the page itself, and you can sort of toggle between like home, playlists, live streams. There'll be some kind of gray lettering on the bottom, and you can toggle over to podcasts, and there we are, front and center, and you'll see all of the episodes in chronological order, and you can cycle through the playlist at your leisure. Now, So again, I want to remind us all to please subscribe, like, share, hit all the buttons, do all the things, get our notifications so that you are aware every time we drop another episode. I really want to know that this is benefiting our community. So if you want to leave comments, if you have any questions, please interact and engage with us on YouTube. I also want to make sure that these stories are getting pushed out into the YouTube streaming through the Deconstruction Junction page. So it's just more advertising for us, just our podcast, but also it does help boost the Deconstruction Junction network as a whole. So I want to get into a little bit what we are putting in the descriptions. So we have we'll usually have like a paragraph where we are reiterating what is the point of the podcast. Often we are including like different trigger warnings. So I want us all to be aware of that. We are vocalizing them at the beginning of the episodes, but we also have them written out in the description as well. And I have added to the description of each episode a resource corner. And in that resource corner, I always list first kind of our core pinned like reference section for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. I've got the link to all of these websites in here. So the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, RAIN, Survivor Sanctuary, and Brave Movement. I also have linked in the resource corner the Earth Sanctuary message board. So I have a message board where I'm talking about different mental health things. I'm listing resources for meditations, resources for understanding the neurobiology of trauma. It's kind of like a catch-all kind of space. So please feel free to interact with us in the Discord as a whole or in the Earth Sanctuary resources message board.
These ones specifically, these are the resources that are always consistently going to be in each episode, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yep. I always want to include these. So you may hear me talk about different meditation tactic or techniques. I'll often will even reference the Survivor Sanctuary, and I have that link in there. And that is a really good space if you are looking for meditation techniques. They offer like 5, 15, and 20-minute, I think, intervals. It was created by Black and Indigenous women, and I really, really like this space as a solid resource to begin to reconstruct the nervous system. And it was built out by survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence. However, as we are dealing with the traumas of religion and dealing with the heavy stuff about morality and eternity and suffering versus paradise and all those kinds of things, we still really are needing to rewire the nervous system in similar ways as other kinds of trauma survivors. So I find the Survivor Sanctuary a really useful spot for myself, and I'm hoping, for others as well. So we've got these pinned resources: the Suicide Crisis Lifeline, National Domestic Violence Hotline, RAIN, Survivor Sanctuary, and Brave Movement, as well as the Earth Sanctuary resource message board. So also in the descriptions, you will also find, I will post relevant articles from the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. I talk about this in my episode as an institute that helped me unpack and deconstruct my own traumas that were occurring outside of religion. But as I am getting more into a community of people who are intentionally trying to deconstruct together around religion, the more I find these resources necessary and relevant for us. So I really like the way NICABM distills information so that kind of everyday lay people can understand the concepts, start working with the tools, start integrating the lessons, and we don't need to have a degree in clinical psychology or have an active practice. They do offer courses that you can take for, whatever prices are listed there, but there are a lot of things that they offer for free, and I really like digging into their kind of blog resource library space because they have a lot of really just good stuff in there, and it's kind of short, sweet, to the point. It's condensed, but it's not too heavy reading. So for example, for my episode, I listed 2 links. That one of them says a body-based approach to managing difficult emotions and how the nervous system responds to trauma. And when you click the links, you'll just go right to the blog on the webpage. It's very kind of easy. It's all boom right there. And a lot of times, a lot of the things that I link will have a video component, and there's a script that's under there as well that can be downloaded. But sometimes it'll just be all reading. And they're very good at naming very specific practices, naming very specific techniques, and they're also really good at naming the experts in these fields. So I want to offer this resource for the community, not just as like learning kind of cool ways to work with your nervous system, although yes, that is like the main core reason, but also I want to start building out a library for us where we get practice with identifying experts. And I know this theme comes up for pretty much every live stream that atheists have ever done since the dawn of the internet and live streaming, but getting people to understand what actual vetted, bona fide, verified, peer-reviewed sources actually look like. I find that is a skill set that not a lot of people have. And I find that learning how to do that is an empowering way to help us deconstruct and build confidence in our own selves. Because no, we don't know everything. And we're not expected to know everything, but knowing how to identify the people or the organizations or the systems or institutions, knowing how to identify where the experts are, where the knowledge of a particular subject is actually being held, that is a skill set in and of itself. That is a form of self-empowerment. So as we are learning how to be in community with one another, as we are empowering one another, as we are learning to become self-empowered our own selves, I also want us to continue expanding that and include knowing how to identify experts, knowing how do experts sound, what do they talk about, how do they present information. And I know that we have different elements where we do that. I know we have different platforms where we are talking about expert sources and, you know, all of this sort of thing. But when it comes to reconstructing the self, knowing how, being able to identify sort of what is occurring in our own biology as a product of our evolution, I want us to sort of have those tools to look a bit more concretely at the nervous system and to be able to identify experts who know how to talk about this, who know how to view this, and who have verified results in clinical practices in helping people work through some of the densest traumas and reconstruct themselves to be whole again.
Yep.
So that's kind of just the housekeeping on what our podcast looks like in the Deconstruction Junction YouTube. Again, please, share, like, leave feedback. If there's things that you want to hear more about, things that you want to learn more about, please feel free to interact with us in the comments. I always like reading those things. And I hope that this episode has been beneficial for our community in some way or another.
Yep. We'll try to do a more casual touch base type of episode, periodically as we move through the series. But yeah, I think this is definitely a great place to start.
All right. Well, with that, do you have any final thoughts to hear?
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo what Garnet said, make sure that you are letting us know, A, your thoughts, what you relate to, B, things that you would like to see more of or hear more about, or C, constructive criticism. If there's, a thought or opinion you have about ways that we could better the podcast or, things we could do differently, drop them below. We're more than happy to hear you out.
If you want to jump on and talk about your deconstruction journey.
That too. If you are willing, we'd definitely like to hear from you.
All right. Well, with that, this concludes our special 666 episode. And I'm so excited for this to drop. And thank you again so much to hear. Thank you to all of our previous guests, sending my love and encouragement and all of the wonderful things of life to you all. I look forward to our future guests. I look forward to our future comments and our future subscribers. And thank you all for joining us. Enjoy your life and yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Garnet. Bye.
Thanks to hear. Bye.